good evening to you both. And let's begin on takeaways from polling as the federal election winds to a close. Kathy, we heard perspective from Nick Nanos off the top. He has the Liberals leading the Conservatives by about 5 points. How much do you see that shifting with just days to go in the election?
Not shifting very much, and also the other interesting thing is when you see some of the sort of projections from other pollsters that figure out seat counts. That's where it could really count, and that's not where we're seeing a big change. We are still seeing a fairly commanding Liberal lead, and so the question, of course, in the end is going to be: is it going to be a Liberal majority or a Liberal minority? So I think we haven't seen a huge difference. So I don't think the leadership debate caused a huge material shift.
Najib, what do you see Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives needing to do in these late stages if they are to be the party that punches through?
I don't think there's anything they can do. I mean, it's too late at this stage. Their platform has not been received very well, with good reason. I mean, it's more of a comic book than it is a platform. So that's not going to help them. The debates didn't help them, and they don't seem to want to change their messaging or their strategy at all, and to even try to attempt anything with the few days left in the election cycle. I mean, it's better to just stay the course, I think, at this point. Only Main Street polling has them anywhere close to the Liberals, but even then, as Kathy said, with seat counts, they still show a Liberal majority, so it doesn't look too promising for the Conservatives.
Kathy, how much sway do you feel the late arrival of costed platforms to have on the outcome of the election?
I don't think it really helped the voters any, and that's sort of the pain in the butt to me about it. Is I think I mean, especially since we saw voters actually coming out in huge droves to early polling, even before they saw particularly the Conservative platform. These platforms are detailed enough that it takes a little while for them to filter down in terms of analysis, in terms of people really reading them, looking at the comparisons. It takes some time. And I think bringing them in this late, people have had time to actually sort of harden their decision even before you get to the platform. So I don't know how much difference they make. They may have swayed, a few voters, but I don't think that drastically.
Najib, having run campaigns, how testy or even nasty do you see the dueling campaigns getting in these final days of the election?
I'm sure we'll get a little bit nastier, especially for those who are trying to play catch up, like the NDP and the Conservatives. As Kathy said, and this is where we as voters and citizens really need to push back on election cycles. In a true democracy, you would have more debates. You would have a deadline for costed platforms so people could actually analyze them and dissect them and look at them closely. I mean, this is all by design, that we have one debate that's so late in the election cycle, and we get platforms that are so late, and this is why these things never affect the outcome, and it ends up being the popularity contest that it is. Even election day not being on a holiday, all of these things detract from real democracy and giving people a real chance to look at these parties and their leaders. I mean, look, we have a new leader, for the Liberals, and we've only had a few weeks really to assess him. So it's all, if you want to be a critic of democracy, it's all pretty vague and haphazard and late, and and all of this is by design. That's the problem. I've prepared platform provincially and federally. I've prepared a leader for a federal debate, and unfortunately, none of these things move the needle, no matter how they perform and how the platforms are received, just because they're received too late.
Kathy, given focus on this being Liberals versus Conservatives, the polls reflecting that between those two parties, they account for more than 80% of the support out there. How much do you expect this election to reflect a shift in traditional voting patterns?
Well, that's a really good question, I think. There's two ways to look at this. If you look at it from a historical perspective, there is some warp and woof in terms of how the NDP fares, particularly if you take a look like 2011, we had them hit the official opposition status. We've had other times when they've been virtually wiped out. So they do tend to come and go in terms of their popularity. They're certainly at a very low point at this point. Does this mean we're devolving into a two-party state? I don't think so. I think this has more to do with externals than it does with the nature of Canadian politics. I think that this has a lot to do with an unusual election cycle where external factors, specifically tariffs and the threat from the United States and general global economy, really has had a major effect that has somewhat skewed our political scene. Do I think that that's going to continue on? I don't see it continuing on into, for 12 years from now. So there is some chance, I think, that the NDP can rebuild and resume that natural up and down cycle.
Najib, what wavelength are you on in that regard? How close are we to federal politics in Canada evolving into a two-party dynamic, even reflecting what we see south of the border?
I mean, when have we had another party? You know what I mean? So I mean, it's not even evolved. That's what the reality is. We're looking at probably 4 out of the 5 of the major parties having new leaders after this election. Jagmeet Singh is fighting for his seat. Elizabeth May is fighting for her seat. We've got a new Liberal leader, and the Conservatives will have to replace their leader for the 4th time in 4 elections. To think that we have anything other than a two-party system is ridiculous, and we've had it for a long time, and it is going to, and by design, it is going to keep evolving to that, because like I said earlier, the rules that are in place for elections, the rules that are in place for party leadership selection, that's another thing where our political parties are allowed to be run like private clubs, and that needs intervention, because that can't continue. And as long as we can let that continue, where these political parties are run like private clubs and allowed to select leaders who are responsible and become responsible for policies that affect millions and millions of people, there has to be intervention. As we've seen in leadership race after leadership race, these things are rigged, these things are not fair, they're not democratic. And we can't let that continue.
The federal campaign trail drew out a recently retired provincial politician in Edmonton Tuesday evening.
When Trump's chaos drives prices through the roof, you want someone who knows what and who they're fighting for. You want someone who shows up. You want someone who doesn't flinch. And that, my friends, is Jagmeet Singh and the team he is building.
Former Alberta NDP leader Rachel Notley rallying New Democrats in support of Edmonton area candidates, and introducing Jagmeet Singh on the federal party leader's second campaign stop in Alberta. Najib, before we get to the broader federal election picture for the NDP, surprised to see Rachel Notley stepping back into the political spotlight and to stump for federal party.
No, I'm not surprised. She has been mentioned as maybe a possible successor to Jagmeet Singh after this election, and maybe that's what she's trying to raise her federal profile in that manner. It's amazing to me that Jagmeet Singh is still the leader of the federal NDP. I mean, in all 3 elections, including this one, that he's been leader, they've lost seats. They might be decimated in this election. He should have been removed as leader after losing seats in the last election. And even I'm flabbergasted why he's in Alberta when he's at the risk of losing his own seat in BC and doesn't seem to be wanting to spend much time there. I don't know. I mean, the NDP are only leading in 1 seat in Alberta, so I don't understand what he thinks a last-minute appearance in Alberta will do for the party.
Kathy, the Alberta NDP convention is in just over a week's time. Naheed Nenshi has already said there will be a resolution asking whether provincial NDP members want to also continue to be federal NDP members, an issue that, as we recall, came up during the leadership race that Nenshi won. What does Rachel Notley's appearance say to you in that regard?
I do think it is interesting that she turned out, and I think perhaps it was just because there is a vacuum from the provincial NDP right now. Certainly, Naheed Nenshi is pulling them away from connection with the federal NDP. This is very similar to a situation we had like 30 years ago, where the provincial Liberals pulled themselves away from the federal Liberals for similar reasons. I think that it's interesting from another perspective too. She and Jagmeet Singh didn't always see eye to eye. They had different of the question of pragmatism in terms of political leadership when she was premier and fighting pipelines and the federal NDP and not being on sides there. So obviously she's buried that hatchet, but I think that this is kind of a nod to the movement rather than some kind of a big rapprochement between the provincial and the federal parties.
Najib, do we see the end in sight for the federal NDP? According to Nick Nanos, under 8% support at the moment. How worried should the party be about the prospect of losing official status in Parliament?
I think they should be very worried, and I think it'll be a hard lesson for them. Like I said, I mean, you should have replaced your leader in the last election, if not sooner. I mean, say what you want about the Conservatives, but they don't tolerate leaders that lose seats, and lose when they should win. So that's a good lesson, I think, for all parties. You have to change your leadership. You have to do it sooner. And I mean, look what it's done for the Liberals of just changing their leader after trailing for, months and months and months. Leaders, despite what some parties might think, do represent the party, are seen as the face of the party, are seen as, as a future prime minister, or could be imagined as a future prime minister. And these things are important, and I think it's going to be a hard lesson for the NDP. I don't think they're going to do well in this election at all. They might lose official party status and fall below that 12 seats, which is, flabbergasting thinking of where they were at one time in official opposition status. But, these are hard lessons, I think, that have to be learned. Will they be totally decimated? I don't think so. I mean, I think there's still time. We need a working class party in this country, and they've also lost their North Star on that as well, of not being that working class party. And I think that's, remember, Canada doesn't have a Labour Party. NDP is supposed to be it.
Kathy, if it is that Jagmeet Singh's leadership is hanging in the balance here, that maybe the party loses official status in Parliament, do you get the sense that he's fighting to stay on?
Actually, no, I don't really see that he's fighting to stay on. He's been asked several times, what's going to happen if you, are, no longer official party? Are you going to leave? He says, I'm not seeing past election day. I think he means that quite literally. I think he's probably going to be bowing out. I don't think it would be a particular surprise. I don't get a sense that he's trying to stay on. I think the fact that they really shifted their strategy in the last couple of weeks to talk about the fortunes of the party rather than Jagmeet as a leader is representative of the fact that all hands now think he's got to go. Now we're talking about, Canada's better with an NDP party. They're not concentrating as the other two parties have been on what their leader represents. So I think this is part of a natural warp and woof in that particular party. They come and go. Like I said, 10 years ago, they were, up there, official opposition type status. Now they're sort of in the dumps. A lot of factors go into what happens with the NDP here, because frankly, they never are within shooting range of actually forming a government.
All right. We'll have to leave it there for time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
You.
Thanks, Mike.